and welcome. I am going to be doing a little tutorial on lesson planning 101. So for the TPAs, we know that there's going to be some lesson planning involved. And in your coursework, there's going to be lesson planning as well. So why not marry the two and make this really, really exciting, engaging, and beneficial to you in the end. So the biggest thing first is with lesson planning is to really, and I'll share the template with you instead of having to see my face the entire time, which probably is not such a delightful sight, but I'm going to go ahead and pull up. Hopefully this is the lesson plan you're seeing right now. It is the scripted lesson plan that you have access to. And the first thing when developing a lesson plan is really to think about your learners. Who is this geared towards? You can also work a little bit, I say, backwards. I used to tell my students when I worked at UNLV, like, you don't have to think about all these things and make it so difficult on yourself, because sometimes you start thinking like, gosh, I want to teach this lesson, but like, what type of assessments am I supposed to use? What type of materials am I supposed to use? I always say, start with your learners, like identify who your learners are. Who's it going to be? Is it going to be an elementary school site? Is it going to be a middle school site? Is it a, secondary or, middle school or high school? So you have to think about that. And do remember that's important that you are gearing this lesson to hit all of your diverse learners in the classroom. So that might be students with or without disabilities, our English learners, and also make sure that we're embedding those culturally responsive teaching practices. That means that we are hitting on all of our students, engaging our learners, and making sure that we are including everyone within their lesson. So for instance, if California, we're doing a lesson on snow, well, that might be relevant to kiddos who live in maybe Northern California, experience a lot of snow, Nevada, desert. So snow's not going to be such a big topic if someone was born in New York. They're have that exposure. They know about snowstorms. They know about all these things that are included. So it's really important to think of our learners and that we're including all of our diverse learners and their background, and if not, to make sure that we are including that. It's really important to, that's why I never say go first, like think about the TPE that you want to look at, your teaching performance expectation. Just start first with your learners, what your lesson topic is going to be, and then everything will start kind of unfolding and making more sense as you work along. Now, you should be looking at standards, your teaching performance expectations. Also, taking a look at the ELD standards, our English language development standards for our English learners. And then also take a look at the TPAs so that you're aware of specifically what you should be looking at, not when it comes to standards. You also might want to look at the UDL, make sure your alignment with Universal Design for Learning, that your lesson plan is making not logical sense, but it has a nice flow, and it's making sure that you are teaching a lesson that hits all of your learners in the classroom. The next thing is your lesson topic. So what do you want your topic? What's it going to be? Is it going to be mathematics? Is it going to be science? Is it going to be social studies? Is it going to be an English language arts lesson? So these are things that you need to think about. And I think I'm going to go ahead and stop share, and then we'll go back if we need to go back to the template. And I will just go ahead and share a little bit more about the lesson plan template. And I want to pull it up so we make sure that we have it. Okay. And that's the wrong one. Isn't life dandy? Especially when you're recording. It's like it always seems to happen that way, but that's okay. So you need to think about the class that you wanted. Like I said, the standards, you want to identify your learners, and then make sure also that you are including the lesson topics. So is it going to be social studies? Are you going to talk about the solar system? Are you going to talk about math and you're going to do fractions? Those are really important things to think about when you are doing lesson planning. The next thing is looking at the lesson plan template is to really think about your lesson objective. And when it comes to your lesson objective, you want to make sure that it is measurable, it's an observable objective. So in a sense, I think it's important to have on the board and let my learners know this is what you're going to be learning today. So the objective is students will be able to identify 4 out of 5 planets with 80% accuracy. I want them to be able to walk away and to know that I taught that lesson and that they're able to have that as a takeaway. I also thought it was important for my learners, I don't care if it's elementary school, middle school, or high school, is that was listed on the board. They know what they are going to be able to do by the end of that lesson. And I'm still trying to sit here and pop open this for you, and it's making me crack up because I keep trying to pull it up and then it keeps disappearing on me. But that's okay. So we are good to go. The next thing is the rationale for the instruction. Why are you teaching what you're teaching? What's the rationale? Why do we want our students to be able to identify 3 out of 4 planets? Why do we want them to be able to find and recognize them on maybe we're doing something that involves technology, using the computer, and recognizing them when they see them. Why? Why do we want these things? We want our lesson to be effective. We want our students to be able to have, like I said, takeaways. We want them to be able to generalize into other settings. So we don't want our students who are sitting in our classroom, say we're teaching an SDC class, we're teaching an RSB class. We also want our students to be included. We want them to be included in the general education setting. And I know that is always a team decision. It's always important to think about that's not only a team decision, but also think about the needs of the student as well and what's beneficial. But we want them to be able to generalize it. So when they go out with their parents, they go out with a friend, a community member, that they're able to generalize what we've taught them into other settings. Next is assessment. Formal, informal, and teacher-made. So you could have a formal assessment that you want to use, but typically as a teacher, I think we do a lot of informal assessments and teacher-made assessments. Let me give an example. So for instance, I used to work with my students, and when we come back from lunch, I worked in a classroom that probably could be considered a special day class, or maybe even more, I want to say more severe, I shouldn't say that. But I worked with students with learning disabilities. So when they come back after lunch, they're kind of tired. And, it's like they just were hanging out with their friends, and now they're like, oh, we got to come back to class. This is not fun. Mrs. Sparks, we're not ready for this. So I would pull up Brain Pop and something that was age appropriate. Brain Pop has little types of assessments, informal assessments that are on there that can be read to the students. They can take an individual assessment. So it's like a 5-minute little video. Maybe it was 6 minutes. They're pretty short. There might even be 2 to 3. And then after that, we would do like an oral quiz together. So I was just assessing them on them paying attention to that little 5-minute lesson, as well as saying, maybe we need to rewatch it. If, I didn't put any students on the spot, but that was something just quick and easy and dirty for us to be able to do when we came back for after lunch. Now that was not really like my lesson, but I guess that could serve as an anticipatory set or advanced organizer for my students. So just know you can use different varieties of that to incorporate into your lessons. Another great one is Kahoot. Kahoot is phenomenal. I think it's fun. You can make your own little assessment. It can be taken as a group. You can have teams. There's so much fun stuff that you can do. Also, just another assessment is just like when you ask students questions, you have whiteboards and they put them up, and then you look across the room, you see if they picked up on what you were teaching them. Materials, technology, and equipment. So you do need to use a variety of materials, technology, and equipment. So you might be using the computer. You might be using a smart board. I was thinking today when I was with you guys and doing this video, I was like, I would really love to have a smart board right now, and that it would like be so cool if I could just show and model it a little bit better. But that happens. I did pick up one of those virtual technology, and I want to make a virtual classroom. So hopefully I can try to pick up and hone in on my skills on that. But different types of ways of engaging your learners. So you might use something along the lines of virtual technology. I see it down there. Or you might use computers, or you might be using colored pencils. It just depends on whatever is tailored to your lesson. Now, for the purpose of this lesson, for instance, if I was teaching a lesson, I always go, this is my go-to. I know it's a little cheesy, but it works. I would do a science lesson more than likely, pick one of my TPE standards, and I would probably be tailoring this to maybe elementary school for my learners. So an advanced organizer or an anticipatory set, let me give you examples of that. So an advanced organizer would me saying to my students today, say, class, welcome to class. So excited you're here. I'm going to go ahead and introduce a lesson today on plants. How many of you have seen plants out in your yard or your grandma's yard? What have you seen? Have you seen pink flowers, roses? What do they smell like? How does it make you feel? So I'd go into a lesson kind of about plants. That's what I would probably more likely do. Probably more of my other favorite one, probably do something on a hummingbird. So maybe I would show different, birds going up to the plants, getting it for the nectar. So that's how I would prompt my students to get engaged in lesson. And I would ask them questions and pick up on their background, their prior knowledge to know what their experience is with plants. We can't just assume that all of our students are doing the same thing, have the same experiences. So we need to hone in on that. Now, the other thing I could do is an anticipatory set. I could bring in some roses into the classroom. I could bring in some flowers and have them just a flower sitting on their desk. They come in, what's this, Mrs. Sparks? What is this? And so hopefully that piques their interest. And advanced organizers more like saying, yesterday we learned about this. Today we're going to do this. Ask them questions, trying to pick up on their background knowledge and tell them what they're going to be learning. This is what we're going to be doing. Kind of like a skeleton outline of your lesson plan, but you're conducing it and you're telling them what they're going to be doing. So you see within the lesson, there's accommodations and modifications and adaptations, assistive technology, culturally responsive teaching practices, and another category for your English learners. So you need to think about how are you targeting your English learners in the classroom? Are you using pictures? Are you using visuals to engage them? Are you using assistive technology? Maybe for the second piece on the body of the lesson, the describe and model and demonstration, that's where I would show a video. I'm not saying you should always just go straight to videos and teach your lessons, but you're probably watching this lesson now and like, I need to see other types of visuals. I need some excitement during this. But this is a time where you describe and model. So this is a time where I might show a video on flowers or plants and talk about how they need the sun, different parts of the flower, the stem, the leaf, and have them know and be able to recognize different parts of the plant and what is the process of the photosynthesis and the sun, the water, everything. That's where I would probably pick a video from National Geographic or something that is friendly. And maybe I picked out one, maybe I picked out two. I don't know. But I know it'd be a good time during your describe and model that you spend about, I'd say 5 to 10 minutes, probably more like 10 minutes to your learners and really get that, I want to say nailed in there, but make sure you're really describing and modeling and demonstrating during this time what you want them to take away. So I really want them to be able to identify different parts of the plant. I want them to recognize the stem. I want them to know parts of that flower so that they have a really good understanding and they're able to generalize that when they go out into the community, or maybe they're sitting in science class and maybe they're middle school at this point and I'm not saying you should have them be able to realize a lesson from years ago, but that is something that you taught them. So this might be a time where you're using assistive technology. You might also be using visuals. What types of accommodations and modifications? Well, you also want to know, maybe some of your learners in the class are visually impaired. So maybe they want something that they can touch, or maybe something with hearing. So we want to think about all these different things and scenarios that you're going to face when you're teaching in the classroom. The next thing would be guided practice. This is where you want your students not to fully know everything, but we want them to be able to know a little bit more about what we were trying to demonstrate. So more than likely, let's jump back to describe model. I probably would model an image and have like a picture for them of the plants and go through it more in detail and model that, right? Then during guided practice, I might put up another picture of parts of a flower. I want to say plant, I guess the same thing, but it's really probably a flower, because if I say plant, then people would get that misconstrued. So gotta be really careful with that. So maybe I put up a part of flower and I maybe have little labels, maybe big magnets, maybe I'm using something on the whiteboard and they're able to put like, oh, this is the flower petal, this is the stem, and I'm guiding them through it and I'm showing it because I've already described and modeled it, right? But now it's their turn to be able to, I'm able to still guide them, but they're able to demonstrate understanding. So they're able to come up to the front of the classroom and put that magnet up there on the board. Just depends on however you want to teach it. I'm going this kind of freestyle right now, so I'm making it kind of simpler. I'd probably put more touches into it, to be quite honest. But I just want to think of ways where my students are engaged. You won't want to put your students on the spot. You don't want them to feel uncomfortable. So volunteer, right? Or you could separate them into, groups and have them do something during guided practice where they work and then they all show like, this is what we found, this is what we did. Especially if this was elementary school, they'd probably be taking their time a little bit more with it. Next, during independent practice, this might be where I'm not saying that you should always just give worksheets, but this might be a time where they can work in groups of 2, or maybe even independently at this point. And I would probably give them some type of activity that involved them having to identify different parts of that flower. There might be something that I could also do. I could do something on the computer, make it more engaging. Maybe I could do something along the lines of a Kahoot. But I think if I was going to do this lesson, I would probably use the Kahoot as an assessment as well at the very end. So that could be kind of a part of it. And then you're putting that into your independent practice. Makes sense? So you're making all these connections. And once you go through this, my mom always taught me this, and it makes me laugh, and I still use it, is that you always think of yourself like, she always said Beetlejuice, it's showtime, which you're Beetlejuice. I shouldn't say you. No one looks like Beetlejuice. You're Beetlejuice in front of the classroom. It's showtime. You're the actor, the actress, and you're following the scripted lesson plan. You're following this, and you're making sure, so you're engaging your students. You're doing whatever you can to grab their attention, so to say. Now, at the closure piece, this is when you're going to wrap it all up. Don't just say, okay, they did that and we're done. It doesn't work like that. So maybe you want to also do maybe some type of exit ticket. Maybe a ticket out the door, or whatever more questions they may have. Might be something as simple as getting, I'm trying to find something in this room, like a box, and they just put their questions into it. Like, that's something you can come back to the next day. Like, oh, yesterday we learned about parts of the flower. Today we're going to learn about this, but you can, answer their questions. The biggest thing is generalization. Like, how are they going to generalize this in other settings? Are they going to generalize this in their community? Maybe, I know one of the schools I worked at, they actually had like a farm on campus. So they planted flowers, they planted vegetables, so they could generalize it. So maybe when they go out to the farm on campus, many of our students are growing their own vegetables. And I know they had like a market here. They were doing that here in Vegas. And that was like the coolest thing ever. So I'm sure they're probably doing that there as well. And what I like about this lesson plan is lesson plan perfection is describe how students master the content, what parts were effective and what were less effective. This is something you're going to have to think about for the TPAs, and you're going to have to go back and reteach it. Did anything happen within the lesson that perplexed you? There has been times I always heard, like, if you're teaching a lesson, you're not supposed to like go back or stop and switch it up. I have had to reteach it during and pause myself and kind of think, you know what, they're really not getting it, or this is really not working. So I've had to do that. What changes would you make? So for the purpose of this lesson plan, teach it, and then you can think and reflect on how you would go back and reteach it. It's okay. Lesson plans, it's evolving, it's learning, and it takes time. And then think about the highlight the TPEs you looked at. Did you engage your learners? Did you look at their culture? Did you take into account their experiences? Did you have this connect to their families? That's another important one. Are you supporting your English learners? Are you using evidence-based practices? You should be getting evidence-based practices in all of your coursework. So you're learning about modeling, visuals, all that good stuff. And then monitoring the student learning. Are you using a Kahoot? Are you using an exit ticket? What type of assessment are you using? Also, are you have a classroom that supports all students? It's free from anything that considered racism or sexism or bullying. Are you maintaining a high expectation of your students? Do you have high hopes for the kiddos that you're going to be teaching? And that is so important. And then you'll go through the rest of the TPEs and just really focus in, because this is what you're going to do for the TPAs as well. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind when you are doing your lesson planning. The next thing is I thought was really important is just to include what it's going to look like when you do the TPAs. So building on that prior background knowledge, finding out what your learners know, building on their prior academic knowledge, and what type of standards, goals are you going to be using. Also, the students' assets. I think it's really important, no matter what, and it's even when we do IEPs and all of that other good stuff, is we're focusing on what the student can do, not focusing on a deficit-based attitude, right? So we're focusing on what they can do. Also, the learning activities. Are we using Bloom's taxonomy? Are they applying? Are they integrating? Are they developing? Are we using that higher order thinking skills? So my lesson plan would have been really like lower level, right? So I might have to beef that up with using think, pair, share activities, using graphic organizers. Maybe instead of thinking about that independent activity, that maybe I won't use a worksheet, maybe I use a graphic organizer. So maybe during that describe and model where we're doing that, they'll have that graphic organizer to help them during independent practice. Or maybe I would do both, labeling and do the guided practice, have them do the magnet on the board, and then I would do that as well. So whatever you can utilize to support your learners. Also, different types of instructional strategies. How are you going to support them? Modeling, so easy to do, right? I tried to, I wish I had the lesson plan. I could just go through it all right now, but I will get you one. Also, providing instructions, asking questions. It's okay. It's so important for our students to communicate. I always tell our teacher candidates, like, ask questions, communicate. That's the biggest one. And then what type of instructional personnel are you going to need? What role are they going to play within their lesson? Because your IAs, instructional assistants, can be really helpful in this process. What type of grouping are you going to use? That's why in your lesson plan, is it going to be an individual activity? Is it going to be a group activity? Or maybe you're, pairs. I discussed that as well. Discussed a little bit, think about your learners and the diverse needs they may need in the classroom, especially with language or terminology. What resources and materials you're going to be using, assessment, and then think about your developmental considerations, social, emotional. I also think, is it age appropriate? That's the biggest one. I'll never forget walking into one of my classroom, and I walked in the classroom and they had Stephen King books and Dr. Seuss, and this was high school. And I'm like, well, the Stephen King probably was age appropriate, but really wasn't a great book for them probably to read. And then Cat in the Hat was definitely like not developmentally appropriate at all. And then always think about your focus students. So when you do your lesson planning, or you'll be doing that, but for your TPAs, you're going to have focus students that you're going to focus on. So just remember that. So you'll have access to not only my lesson plan, what it looks like for the TPAs, and then I also included a lesson plan template that was utilized in multiple subject and single subject. So it'll be really be helpful in helping you really look at the TPAs, but also make sure you're hitting everything all in one. So we really don't have a TPA class specifically just for, the TPAs, but this should really help you in thinking about all your learners. Another thing I wanted to touch on, but I'll go through this in more detail later on, is the UDL and multiple means of representation. So there's different ways students can tell you that they understood the assignment. So did they understand the assignment? I can tell you something in a nutshell by doing a nice little diorama. I can make a beautiful artistic diorama like that. I can draw you a picture of it, but we're not going to want our students just to draw a picture. Diorama stimulates that creativity, and there's different ways of showing that you understood something. I'm laughing because it's green screen in the back. I can see it like, oh, that looks creepy. Okay, sorry. I got distracted. So I can do a diorama. I could do a PowerPoint presentation. I could do an oral presentation. I could do a written narrative. There's also learning menus. Students get to choose and have choice. I know this isn't always opportune, but learning menus, and I'll make sure that we go through this stuff in more detail, but learning menus allow you to have a choice of an appetizer, 2 or 3 choices. They can choose what they want to do. They can answer 4 out of 5 questions. They can make like a trifold, like little brochure on it. They can, I'm trying to think, they might even be able to develop a Kahoot at that point. But there's different ways of showing that you understand something. I can tell you something, probably better writing it out than doing an oral presentation. I might skip over something because I get so darn nervous, and then I'm like, ah! So a written presentation might be better for me. Or I don't really like writing a lot, but it probably would be better for myself. Or I could just turn in a PowerPoint minus the oral presentation. There are different ways to show that you demonstrate understanding. You want to hone in on your students' abilities, possibilities of what they could do within the lesson to demonstrate understanding. So you have to think about that maybe during your independent practice, what you want your students to take away from the lesson. And I might have to see, if I'm teaching students with more severe disabilities, I'm going to have to be very creative, and I need to look at what they can do and what they cannot do. So maybe some of my learners are they're non-speakers. They do not speak. So I have to think of other creative ways, using their Go Talk, using whatever communicative device that they're using, to have them to be able to demonstrate understanding, pointing, whatever, eye gaze. I would have to be creative, right? So these are just things for you to think about. Hopefully this is beneficial. I know it's a little long, but hopefully you can have a good little takeaway on lesson planning. But don't worry, there will be more to follow. Thank you.